Hey there everyone, this is Leo once again from TechLion PCs, and today we got ourselves another AMD commission build using the Ryzen 5 5600 along with their Radeon 6650 XT. Last generation part prices are dropping quickly, and really that's hitting very well now in terms of price to performance. Now before we dive into this PC, quick word from us. This video is brought to you by us over at TechLionPCs.com, where you can check out our store for custom mid-range builds along with our consolation page where you can fill in whether you'd like an upgrade, a new build, a pre-built PC, along with a budget, and we'll work with you on the PC of your choice. Check us out again over at TechLionPCs.com. Now let's look at the purpose of this build, as that's pretty important when you're trying to determine what it is that you're trying to build here. They have a budget set of $800 and wanted to ensure that they could play PC games like God of War and the Final Fantasy VII Remake at 1080p, 60 FPS, high settings. I told them at that budget, no sweat, could easily get that done for them. And if we take just a moment to look over at the God of War PC specs and check over at the performance column that we see here, we're using a processor and a video card that's better than the ones that they're recommending for this area, and this is cranking out at 1440p 60 FPS on high. So we're well in the category that we need to be able to build a system that they're looking for here. And as for aesthetics, they wanted an all-black build. We're talking no fancy LEDs or lights in this PC, or at the very least, very minimal. Totally understandable that RGB puke that you see in a lot of quote gamer cases can tend to get a little bit to some folks, which is the very reason we also chose the 5600 instead of say 12100F, because it comes with a black cooler. So let's get to unboxing these parts and building this PC. For the motherboard, we're going to start off with an ASRock B450M AC motherboard, which includes itself a proper M.2 slot, Wi-Fi support, 4 DDR4 RAM slots, and several extra features that we won't really need that much for this build. For memory, we're working with a pair of Clev Hynix chips, two 8GB 3200 MHz sticks that are also here to fit that all-black aesthetics. That means no lights on these sticks of RAM. And we're of course going to be running these in dual channels, so of course let's get them popped into slot 2 and 4 of this motherboard. Now for storage, no PC in 2023 is built without an NVMe drive, so we're going to go with the Team Group MS30 1TB SSD. It's a pretty frugal stick, and it's still fitting with that all-black aesthetic that we're aiming for. So we'll go ahead and pop this thing into the singular M.2 slot that's available on the motherboard, screw it in properly, and then give it a small nudge to make sure that it's fully in place. The last part of the motherboard prep is going to be the Ryzen 5 5600 processor that we have. This is 6-core, 12 threads with a boost clock of 4.4 GHz. Sure, it's a last-gen part, however, AMD still has yet to release a processor in the 7000 line that anyone would consider a budget-friendly option. So this is their go-to choice for the budget-conscious gamer. We're going to take out the Wraith cooler and pop out the top piece so that the logo can align a bit better with the motherboard once we get to installing it. It's a fairly simple modification. We just unscrew the 4 sides that are on it, rotate it just a little bit once, screw it back on, and we're pretty much good to go on that end. As for the motherboard side, we'll need to remove the fan retainer brackets first that are mounted onto the backplate, then we'll pop in the 5600 processor. Now normally the Wraith cooler does come with its own pre-applied thermal paste, which usually works just fine for this processor, but I had actually used this cooler for a previous video, so we're just going to reapply a fresh coat here, and then we'll get to screwing in the properly aligned Wraith cooler onto the motherboard itself. And with the processor, CPU cooler, RAM, and NVMe drive all set up on the motherboard, we could take a moment to admire the mostly black aesthetics of this hardware before we start working on the case itself. Now speaking of the case, the one that we are going to be using is going to be developed by DeepCool. Now this is the first time I'm utilizing one of their cases on this channel, so let's see how I like it. This model in particular is the DeepCool CH370 Micro ATX case, which, once again, doesn't come with any RGB fans or lights of any sort, but it does come with a single 120mm exhaust fan pre-installed. But we'll go ahead and just throw another 140mm fan up in the front just for some proper airflow. Now before I start mounting the motherboard or the power supply, I'd like to get the fan installed first so I don't have to worry about wiring a bit later on. I happen to have an all-black fractal 140mm fan on hand for this build. For future builds, I'll most likely stick with using fans from the same case manufacturer for some more consistency. The front panel of this case pops off quite easily, along with the dust filter. From here we'll have access to mount the fan that we'll be using. It's also important to make sure that, and something I do love with these newer fans, to make sure that it's pointing in the right direction. These are going to be intake fans, so we want to make sure it's pointing inwards. From there we'll have 4 simple screws and the fan is properly mounted. And now for the power supply. No ketchup and mustard cables here, just a full blacked out cable system. The 6650 XT video card that we're using doesn't call for anything more powerful than a 500 watt power supply, so we're going to be using the EVGA 500 watt power supply that we see here, which will be more than enough to fit our need. We'll just go ahead and get it slid into the bottom area of the case and get it fully mounted in. Let's get the motherboard with all of its bits mounted onto the case. First, we'll pop in the I/O shield into the back of the case. Next, we'll align the port to the motherboard to the I/O shield and slide it into place, then fully secure it to the case itself with the 8 screws to hold it in place. This is the perfect time to start running cables through the case, as it becomes increasingly difficult to wire things around while the GPU is installed into the PC. So we'll get power mounted onto the motherboard, plug in the intake and exhaust fans, and get the front panel I/O connections all hooked up. And of course, for the final component of the build, the AMD Radeon 6650 XT by XFX. In my opinion, this is still the best bang for your buck brand new GPU that you can get on the market right now for 1080p, medium to high gaming across all games that you can find out there. Sporting a solid 8GB of video memory and a boost clock of 2.64 GHz, 3 DisplayPorts 1.4 ports, and an HDMI 2.1 port. This will kick tail at all the games that we're going to throw in it a little bit later in the video with reasonable settings. In my opinion, this card is the new minimum standard for new PCs being built these days and can still be fine for near around $250 US. With all the components fully installed, let's get the front panel back onto this PC, install a copy of Windows, and test out a couple of games to see how it performs. Now, I don't own a copy of Final Fantasy VII Remake or God of War on PC, I actually have them on my PS5, but the games I'll be running here will definitely suffice. All the games are going to be running at 1080p resolution, so let's hit up some multiplayer titles first with some Fortnite, running it at DX12, game on medium settings, averaging 80 FPS in combat. Can definitely shoot my way through a higher frame rate if we wish by bringing it to the DX11 settings for a more competitive atmosphere, but I personally like my games looking prettier, even on multiplayer titles. CSGO running the benchmark tool netted us an absolutely insane 522 FPS on average. Definitely looking forward to see what a build like this does when CS2 releases later this year. Jumping out of ship still, we're going to go through another BR title, my favorite, Apex Legends, running it on high settings, which has netted us a very impressive 180 FPS average. So having a 144Hz monitor would definitely work well if you're playing competitive games on a build like this. And for less competitive titles, we're going to first put in Tiny Tina's Wonderland here, running it on high settings using the in-game benchmark tool, netted an average of 108 FPS. Now, you can even likely push it up to the badass setting or the maximum setting and still push above 60 FPS in a build like this. The last title we're going to look at with this benchmark suite will be Resident Evil 4's 2023 remake, running into the village area using the prioritized graphics setting, or high for short, averaging an extremely good 85 FPS. We might even be able to turn on some settings like ray tracing and FSR and still net above 60 FPS with this kind of machine. Overall, I'm incredibly satisfied with this build. Checked off all the boxes in this commission that my customer was asking for, and I'm thinking I'm going to start putting builds just like this one as an on-demand build on our website that you can check out over at techlinepcs.com. If you have any questions about this build or want to commission one of your own, let me know in the comments below, send me a message, or even check out our site once again at techlinepcs.com or hit us up on our social media feeds. Until next time, this is Leo signing out.